So you want to be a Jiu-Jitsu blue belt, but do you actually know what it takes to become a blue belt in Jiu-Jitsu? Often students are never really given any guidelines or really taught what it takes to become a Jiu-Jitsu blue belt in detail. They're often just told, hey, if you just focus on the fundamentals, if you just worry about drilling, and you just worry about sparring enough, the blue belt will come one day. But the questions that I often get asked was, well, how long should I keep doing this until I can become a blue belt? What areas should I be focusing on in order to become a blue belt? And how do I know if my skill level is actually up to blue belt standards? This is where I encourage students to follow what I call the 3 C's model. Basically, how consistently do we need to be training in order to become a blue belt? How much competency do I need to have, and what areas should I be focusing on to meet this blue belt expectation? And then what level of capability do my skills need to be at to know that I've reached the blue belt level? In today's video, we're gonna break down this 3 C's model in more detail, so that way you guys can almost have a complete guide that you can either follow or reference from white to blue belt on your jiu-jitsu journey. If you guys wouldn't mind, make sure you hit that like and subscribe button down below. It does help me stay in good favor with the YouTube gods and in the algorithm, and it does help others find my videos more easily. Make sure you hit that bell icon, that way you're notified whenever the latest video comes out. If you guys are new here, I really help jiu-jitsu students who are lacking direction be able to find it very quickly. That way they can start to improve quickly, they can meet all their goals, and they can just start having more fun in jiu-jitsu and develop with a lot less headache. You know, I've been teaching and training jiu-jitsu now for 15 years, and I've seen so many white belts fail at becoming a blue belt, but I've also seen a lot of white belts make it to blue belt as well. So this framework that I'm gonna be showing you guys today is going to be built off of the backs of those students that have been successfully able to make it to blue belt. So a lot of the metrics I'm going to give you and a lot of the timeline is going to be built off of students who I have coached successfully to make it to blue belt. Before we get too deep into the information, I want to clarify something real quick. Some schools do actually have a curriculum or guidelines for you to follow. If they do, I am absolutely happy for you, and make sure you guys keep following those. But there's a lot of schools that actually don't have a curriculum, or they're very loose guidelines on what it takes to actually become a blue belt. Even if you're just watching this video to reference about what your school does versus what I say, or you're needing a framework to follow or kind of a guideline to follow, then this video is really going to be for you, because I know what that feels like. It feels like that you're just hopelessly spinning your wheels and you're not sure when you're going to make it to the end of the rainbow. Hopefully we can help you guys out with that today and give you some things that you can shoot for. So let's go ahead and get started and break down this framework here. So the first thing that we want to do with any kind of plan that we're trying to follow is we want to set a goal. Well, the obvious goal here is to make it to blue belt. That is our big goal. Often students will ask, well, how long is it going to take to become a blue belt? And that's where our first C is going to come into place with consistency. The way I define consistency is X amount of days a week of frequent training without breaks. What that really means is how many days a week are you actually training on a consistent basis over a long period of time. This is super important to understand because it will create a realistic expectation about how long you will have to do the amount of work to become a blue belt. So I can reasonably say, in order to become a blue belt, what we want to look at is how many training sessions it's going to take. I think it takes anything between about 125 training sessions to 200 training sessions. Now, I already know what you guys are saying. Well, Chase, how do you know it takes 125 to 200 sessions? Well, first off, we can do some math. So let's go ahead and break that down real quick. So if you take 125 training sessions and then you divide that by 2, what you're gonna get is 62.5. And then if you take that 62.5 and we divide it by 52 weeks or 1 year, what that's going to leave you with is about 1.25 roughly, or 1.2. So that's telling you that if you're training 2 days a week on a consistent basis, it could take you about 1.5 years or 1.25 years roughly to become a blue belt. Now we can obviously put that on the other end of the spectrum too. If you said we take that same process and you do 200 training sessions, well, that means it could take almost 2 years to become a blue belt. I think it's like 1.9 technically. I bet if you ask most of the blue belts out there that you train with, or people who have become a blue belt, they will say it probably takes anything between 1 to 2 years on average to become a blue belt. Obviously, there's going to be some things that affect that, and we're going to cover that in the other 2Cs that we have yet to cover. We can't just say because we've checked off the box of doing 125 or 200 training sessions, that means I'm instantly a blue belt. That's not how that works. But what happens is, though, students have now an idea of how close they are. I like to relate this a lot to like driving a car on a road trip. And as I'm driving the car, I see that I'm like 50 miles away. Then I see that I'm 40 miles away, and then 25 miles away, and then so on and so forth. And I know I'm getting closer to my destination. Having this number in mind is super valuable. Where I don't think it's helpful is using attrition. So what I mean by attrition is saying, oh, well, everyone says it takes anything from 1 to 3 years to become a blue belt. When you think about it like that, that can be very overwhelming for a lot of people. And most people have never consistently done an activity for that long before in their life. But a very simple thing you guys can do is start creating a way to track your classes. And I don't care if that means that you have some fancy spreadsheet that you use, or you very simply print off a box that has 125 to 200 check marks, and every time you go to class, you check it. But the more that you guys can reference and you can see how much you have completed and how close you are to a potential number, that is a good sign for your jiu-jitsu. Knowing that, it should take you 125 to 200 training sessions to roughly become a blue belt. Now, once again, if your school has particular guidelines or a particular set of classes that you have to do, sometimes they make you go to so many fundamentals classes, they make you do so many sparring classes, and if they're super strict about it, well, then this number is going to be maybe somewhat off. Maybe for you, it's less. Maybe for other people, it's more. Now, there's another way to affect this as well, too. You could also think about getting to your destination faster by pushing down on the gas much faster. So instead of training 2 days a week per se, right, you could plug in 6 days a week or 4 days a week or whatever you wanted to, and then you divide that same process by these 125 to 200 training sessions. And that would make sense because obviously the more volume that you're going to be training, there's a better chance that you're going to become more competent, and then you're going to also become more capable, which we're going to break down as well too. But I would be very careful to understand what that actually means. So a lot of times I have seen students that do that they start to push down on the gas a lot of times, but consistency is more important than frequency. Consistency is something that you do over a longer period of time. Frequency can also be done over a longer period of time, but it doesn't have to be. You can be very frequent at something for a short amount of time. So you could train 6 days a week for 2 months. Then if you take 2 months off or you're not very consistently training after that, that is just an example of a lot of frequency. Consistency means that if you're doing 2 days a week or 3 days a week, you're consistently doing that over the long haul. I've seen so many times that students are like driving their car and driving really fast and trying to speed up to this 125 or 200 hours, whatever you want to call it. But because then life gets in the way or they can't maintain that pace, their car like runs out of fuel and they run out of gas or they break down, and now they're on the side of the road. And they were maybe pretty close at the point where they broke down. They were close to reaching this number, but then their buddy just passes them along by going like half of the speed because they were able to be more consistent than more frequent. Now, let me know down in the comments below if your school has some type of curriculum or some type of guidelines for you guys to follow. Now, just training without learning anything shouldn't be the main goal of jiu-jitsu. Even if you've checked off the boxes of getting all 125 training sessions or 200 training sessions, but you can't remember the essential steps or what's required of you as a blue belt, then it basically doesn't really matter. And you've probably inefficiently used those training sessions. So that brings us to our second C of competency. Now, the way I define competency is how well do you grasp the necessary knowledge that's needed for you to become a blue belt. So basically, which techniques, concepts, or principles should you focus on or should you know well enough in order to achieve your blue belt? Now, this is probably one of the most debated topics within the jiu-jitsu world. There is no one set of standards or moves that really make up a blue belt that everyone in jiu-jitsu can agree upon. Each school has their own way of potentially determining a blue belt. One school might emphasize like guard versus another one might emphasize standing techniques more, or one school might encourage you to be more defensive or more offensive at blue belt. I bet even if you typed into YouTube right now, blue belt requirements or what it takes to become a blue belt, you're gonna find massively different opinions, and you'll probably even see that some contradict the other ones. So I'll give you guys what I deem students should be competent in order to become a blue belt. If your school does it completely different, that's totally okay. I'm just going to give you guys what I think white belt students should be competent in order to become a blue belt. So essentially you can break down to what you need to be competent in into two main categories of the bottom and the top. Now what I have laid out right here is the bottom, and we're going to look at the top here shortly. If you want to get a piece of paper out or write this down, now would be a good time to take notes for you guys. From those two main areas, you can also have defensive and offensive techniques or concepts or principles or whatever you want to call them. I think the easiest way to do this is then to break it down kind of by position, because I firmly believe there are foundational positions that are most common for white belts to experience. Whenever we're going to be talking about stuff, the thing that I want you guys to understand is I'm going to be talking about a thing called primary. Primary means the main or the go-to. Talks about the back, what you should have is one primary escape. So I don't want you guys to have any more than one primary one, and we'll talk about why that is here in a second. Then from the mount, what I want you to have is one elbow and then one bridge and roll escape, because I think that's good for everyone to have one of each. You want to have one main elbow escape and one bridge and roll escape. When it comes to side, you want to have one guard recovery, like a shrimp escape or some type of escape that brings you back to the guard when it comes to that. Then you have one what's called underhook escape. Some of you guys might have different names for these, but essentially these are very foundational things in jiu-jitsu. When it comes to the guard position, we talk about defense. I want you to have what I call one primary guard, right? One main guard. And that just means that you have an area that if you had to escape the mount with an elbow escape or an area you wanted to recover to guard, you have a guard that you feel comfortable in. Whether that's a closed guard, an open guard, a butterfly guard, a half guard, but you have a main guard that you feel like all your defenses are funnel toward. Then when it comes to the offensive side and we talk about that guard position, what I would recommend students do to start to develop some offense is that they have two sweeps and then two attacks, right? And those attacks could be things like triangles or chokes or so on and so forth. So when we talk about wanting to be competent, I want you guys to be competent in these areas of jiu-jitsu, especially when you're going to be a blue belt. We could debate all day. Usually where I see the disagreement is in stuff like this is which escape should a student learn, or which elbow escape is best, or which bridge and roll escape is best, or which guard recovery is best for a student. And there's never going to be a unified consensus in that part. If you guys are looking for like, oh man, should I be focused more on the mount or more on the side or more on the guard, this gives you a realistic idea you could do. This will solve a lot of the basic problems that you will experience as a white belt in order to become a blue belt. Now we're moving on to the top position. Now the interesting thing you'll see about the top is that we're primarily only going to be focused on the offensive side. There are definitely going to be some defensive components that you guys could learn from being in the top positions as well. But the main objective that I want you guys to know is what you should be trying to focus on, or what areas you should be competent in the top position. And that's going to mainly be the basic offensive ideas. So when we talk about the back, what I want a student to have, once again, is primary, the main, basically one idea, is that you have one attack. Whether that is a rear naked choke or a gi attack, right? If you want to split it between gi and no gi, you can definitely do it. But you basically have one attack. Why is it only one? Why isn't it a million? Well, because as a white belt, the chances of you getting to most people's back and being able to attack and choke them out is very, very small. So majority of the time as your white belt career, you're going to be in the defensive or worst case scenario positions. But you still want to have one attack from that position in case you do get to the back. Now, when we talk about the mount, what I encourage students to have is one primary control whether that's a low mount or a high mount or with hooks or some type of mount that they have a main go to. And then also one attack, whether that is going to be an arm lock or a collar choke or some type of attack that they can have. And the side is essentially very similar. You want to have one style of side control that you enjoy, whether that's a knee on belly, a hip to hip, on the knees. There are all kinds of different side controls you can have, but you want to have one main control, and then once again you want to have one main attack. And from the side, that could be arm locks, that could be kimuras, that could be a key lock, but you have one kind of main attack or setup that you like. Now from the guard, this is where it gets a little bit more detailed. We want to have what I call one kneeling pass, which is basically means being inside of the closed guard, or basically you're kneeling down and you want to have kind of a pass that you like to do from there. And then you would have one standing pass. And standing pass is going to normally come from either an open guard position or maybe you stood up from closed guard. You have some way to pass, whether you are already standing, somebody's in a seated position, or they are kneeling, or you're kneeling, so you're in some type of a guard position, right? And so these are the main areas that I want you guys to have competency in order to become a blue belt. What do I mean by the competency? Well, remember, it's what I deem that you have good knowledge in. How do we define what knowledge is? Well, in my opinion, knowledge is 80% of the technique steps or 80% of understanding when you would use it. So for example, if we go to this guard pass, could you actually list out the steps of your kneeling pass that you like to do? Everything down from the posture prevention to actually opening up the guard to breaking it to the step 1, step 2, step 3 of the guard pass. Could you actually list out and write all those details out? Or can you actually execute it at a reasonable speed, or do you have to sit there and you blank out? If you guys go back through and look at the other section that I already did, I believe in total, this is around 20 different main concepts or main ideas that you guys should have competency in. I know more schools might have more detailed requirements. They might say for you, hey, for the back attack, I want you guys to know this style of rear naked choke. Or maybe even from the mount, they expect you to know more than just one attack. Maybe they want you to know a key lock. Maybe they want you to know a collar choke. And that's absolutely fine. But I'm just giving you guys somewhere that you can place your attention on. And if you don't have any of these, if you're not knowledgeable in at least these things, then you might want to start to move your direction that way. That way you can start prioritizing what you should be focusing on your way to blue belt. Now, this is the last of the 3 C's for a main reason. So the first thing is that if you're not consistent, it's going to be hard to make any gains in jiu-jitsu. We already broke that down earlier. If you don't have the right amount of knowledge and you're not competent in a certain area of jiu-jitsu, then that's a problem as well too. The capability, how I define it, is you being able to apply the knowledge against a resisting opponent or a resisting person. So this is also known as your skill level. Even if you have this knowledge, but you can't apply it against certain individuals, then that's a problem. But often what I see students struggle with is knowing how to gauge their capability. And the way that I recommend white belts start to do this is by against people who are their own skill or less. Honestly, I don't care how a white belt does an elbow escape against a purple belt or how he does a guard recovery against a brown belt. What I'm trying to deem if they're capable is how are they executing their knowledge-based components against people who are their own skill or less. And so this is why it's extremely important to develop this kind of internal gauge whenever you're training jiu-jitsu. Often students will do this with competition, and because they're competing against people who are their own skill level, theoretically, that is how they're gauging the capability. The one problem that I have with that is that it's mainly only gauging the offensive component side of it. Because you're trying to impose your will and you're trying to dominate, you're not willingly evaluating how good you're doing in defensive, and you're kind of being put to the test, and who knows the skill level, actual similarity. That's very vast at a white belt competition level. To me, having this capability and evaluating it with inside of your own training environment, I think is the strongest valid of evidence that we can have to know if you're an actual blue belt. So whenever you're training, and if we go back to our example that we had earlier and we talk about our mount escape, or we're talking about our elbow escape, if I can successfully do this elbow escape against people who are my own skill or less, then I am very capable. That's what I would call highly capable. Now, if I'm a white belt and I'm rolling around and I'm training with somebody who is a lesser white belt than me, maybe like 1 stripe or 2 stripes, and I'm 4 stripes and I'm close to my blue belt, and I can't even escape their mount, then that's a red flag. Ding, ding, ding. I should probably now go back to my list and evaluate which of my primary escapes I should really refine or start to develop so that way I can get ready for that blue belt level. So let's do a quick recap of all of these again, right? So we have C1 of consistency. This is where I think is the first priority, right? So like I said, if you're not consistent, it's going to be tough. Next is the second. So you go down here and you want to make sure you're knowledgeable in these areas. If you're not knowledgeable in these areas, that could be a problem. And then as you start to become knowledgeable and you gain that ability, then we can move all the way over to this last part of C3 right here of capability. And then it just kind of goes back around again. You could keep reevaluating this. So if you've done all of this, if you are consistent and you've reached this number, and then you are competent and then you are capable, well, then you need to be evaluating if you're not a blue belt, why? Why are you not a blue belt? What is going on here? If you're literally telling me that you've done this many sessions and you're competent in this area and you're capable in your own skill and against people who are other, why are you not a blue belt? You should be able to be a blue belt by all of these things. Remember, it's a framework and there's going to be pitfalls. So just because you're capable of some things here and you can do certain moves against people your own skill, if you don't have the right amount of knowledge, that's a problem. Now, in theory, if you're capable and you have the competency and you haven't done this 125 to 200 sessions, then you're probably a standout and congratulations. But in my experience, most students have to reach this 125 training sessions to 200 training sessions in order to be competent in enough knowledge and also have developed enough capability to become a blue belt. So there it is. There's your complete white to blue belt guide that you guys can start to check off. So if you guys like this kind of information, click down in the link below. I've opened up a few more spots for my online coaching program where I go into a lot more detail with this type of information to help get you guys going right away. It's much different than a regular instructional where you're just having to kind of hopefully watch the stuff and hopefully you apply it. We're actually working together. We have calls, we talk about it, and we come up with a plan together to help your jiu-jitsu start to accelerate. So if you guys like that kind of stuff, make sure you click the link down below. Also, make sure now you guys check out this next video right here where I go into more detail about this training environment. And I'll see you guys in the next one.